All right, welcome to the first live stream. I'm going to start podcasting here in a second. This is the first time I've recorded my podcast live, so please bear with me. It's going to be definitely not as smooth as the finished product that you hear on your regular podcasting platform. But hopefully it's entertaining. So just getting some final notes into place here. I record on Adobe Audition, so my recording screen looks something like this. That's what I'm recording off of. I've got my main track up on the top there, my theme on the second track. My third track here is clips. Overflow track I just use to put tracks on while I'm editing, so I can just pull them down, grade them out. And then guest track, if I ever have a guest on the show, hopefully I will. We'll see how it goes. So that's what my audition looks like. I actually put that over here on my second screen. Get that out of the way, and here's my notes for the show. When I do a video for YouTube, I usually try to get the camera lined up right in front of the screen, so I almost use the camera as like a teleprompter. Not the case today. You guys are going to see me looking off camera quite a bit. I'm just going to be looking straight at the notes, since this is usually just an audio file, and it's hard for me to look at the camera and look at my notes at the same time with this setup. Just a lot more to read, a lot more research done. So I'm just going to get these notes done here, and then we'll get going with the live podcast. So stay put. If you have any comments or questions during the podcast, I'm not going to be able to get them while I'm recording, maybe real quick in a break. I do stop recording here and there just to adjust clips and things like that, and so I can get a better feel for what it's going to sound like when it's complete. But questions, comments, things like that on the subject, or, how I'm doing this, what my process is, please leave them in the comments. I will get to them at the end. So appreciate anyone tuning in. So I'm just going to, like I said, clean up these notes here, and I will be ready to podcast in a second. I almost always mess up the beginning like 5 times. Getting started is the hardest part. Just want to make sure that this is good here. Okay. There we go. I think my clips are probably outputting to my USB interface, so you guys might not hear the clips. I've only got one for this episode, so you won't be missing too much if I play the clip, but if I stop, I'm probably just listening to the clip so that I can pick up when the clip comes in. So just muting that track there. Let me know if you can hear the music. I'm going to play the theme right here. I don't think you're going to be able to hear it. I'm pretty sure it's outputting elsewhere. But let me know if you can hear the music. Okay. That was just the intro there. I usually let the intro play all the way through, just, again, to get a feel for the pacing. So I think I'm about ready to start. There's the intro, critical race theory, clip, last episode ending, educational reflap. Okay. Republicans take on CRT. Play the clip there. Last episode ending. All right, that's good. That's good. 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 Okay. All right, so I'm probably going to get started here in a second. So the way I usually start is I'm listening to the intro in my earphones. Then I'll come in. I have a timing thing, so I come in at a specific point. Like I said, you guys probably won't be hearing the intro. After that, I try to record everything in a single take if I can. I've got one clip that's going to be up toward the beginning. After that, it should be straight recording all the way through. If I jumble up my words or pause or I go brain dead for a portion, which happens, then you may see me pause, regroup, and get back into the episode. So like I said, any questions, comments, anything like that as I record, please throw them in the comment section. I will try to get to them after the episode if I've got time to do that. I have a hockey game tonight at 7 o'clock, so got to squeeze this in there. So I'll try to get to the questions or comments after, but once I start recording, I'm not going to be able to look at the comments very much, and I'm not going to be able to answer any of the questions. So more, you're here for the content, and then we can get to it at the end. And of course, this should be edited and out tomorrow as a really nicely polished episode, hopefully, because editing can take some time, but try and do Wednesdays every week here. So like I said, it's going to go silent as I listen to the theme song. Once the theme plays, I'm going to jump in, and then you'll have a podcast live, and you can see me stumble my way through it. Hopefully not. Hopefully it's not too bad. But yeah, like I said, intros usually takes 4 or 5 times. So here we go. That's good. Minimize this. All right. All right. All right, so here we go. Going to start recording. Theme song playing now. Hey, everybody, welcome to The New Deal. I'm your host, Jerry Nutini, and thanks for listening. For more from The New Deal, head on over to thenewdeal.com for The New Deal podcast, blog, and YouTube episodes. And if you like what you see in here, please subscribe, like, rate, review, podcast, articles, whatever it is. It is much appreciated. This week is a 2-part episode, or part 2. There is something wrong. Man, and that was pretty good too. All right, so we stopped because my fade out is not on my track. I'm talking. It's like the music is so loud. Sorry, just editing the level there. Okay, got it. So I won't be going deaf while I'm giving my intro. All right, so that's one. That's one. I almost got through it, but there's the first one. Here we go once again. Hey, everybody, welcome to The New Deal. I'm your host, Jerry Nutini, and thanks for listening. For more from The New Deal, head on over to thenewdeal.com for The New Deal podcast, blog, and YouTube episodes. And if you like what you see and hear over there, please subscribe, like, rate, and review the podcast, episode, and blog. It would be much appreciated. This week is the second part of a two-part episode on critical race theory. I'm just going to give a slight recap of where I left off last week, just so I can bring anyone up to speed who didn't catch the whole episode and doesn't feel like listening to a whole hour of podcast before you jump into this one. So last week we went over critical race theory. What is critical race theory? Well, critical race theory is an academic concept that is more than 40 years old. The core idea is that racism is a social construct, and that is not merely the product of individual bias or prejudice, but also something embedded in legal systems and policies. That's the definition of critical race theory. As we learned, the conservative take on critical race theory is this. Listen to this clip. All right, so I paused the recording. I'm just dropping a clip in to get my timing correct. Unmute the clip track. Stop there. Slide that over. And away we go. Second part of the clip, Ted Cruz is speaking. So there we go. The conservative take, CRT, is every bit as racist as the Klan in white sheets. So remember the first definition I gave? That was the conservative take, so to speak. So with those definitions in mind, I just want to recap where I left off last episode, what my conclusions were. So we talked somewhat about CRT being in education, whether or not it should be taught in the classroom, kind of the pros and cons to why it should be taught in the classroom. So far as education goes, I said that to omit these concepts from our curriculum would be in and of itself indoctrination and propaganda, because a curriculum like that is going to give everyone a warm, fuzzy feeling about America, and it's going to ignore the larger issues of race and paint that warm, fuzzy picture. It would be the equivalent of making excuses for a partner's alcohol or drug use for the sake of protecting their reputations. And that type of behavior is going to ignore or minimize reality while enabling the continuation of the bad behavior. And in this regard, systemic racism is reality. Systemic racism is the bad behavior that we're going to continue to enable and ignore if we don't address it, and certainly within our high schools and colleges. Conservative critics of critical race theory and systemic racism, who do not want these concepts taught to students, do not see or do not want to see a problem. And if they don't acknowledge a problem, they're not going to have any interest in fixing a problem. So that was where we left off last episode. And again, if you want more details, please go check out my episode on critical race theory part 1, where we go over a lot of the education stuff, how this theory came into the public discourse with Christopher Rufo appearing on Fox News a year ago, and how we got here. That's all in the first episode. Today, I want to go over kind of what the conservative process is, the cultural pressures that we see, and the GOP endgame. So there's an American recipe for ignoring racism. Just as a disclaimer, this episode is going to have a heavy focus on the way that I perceive conservatives personally, and how I think they operate. I want to be clear that when I use terms like conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican, progressive, I'm painting in wide strokes. And I want to recognize that these groups themselves, this is how they're defined in the mainstream today. Okay, so I understand that not every member of these groups is going to think or feel or express themselves in the same way as the way that I'm painting it, as other people in that ideology. So I just want to make sure I'm not grouping everyone up. So just a disclaimer, I'm going to use language like that, but I'm not grouping everyone in together. I want moderates and conservatives to be able to listen to the podcast so that we can have a conversation, or at a minimum, so that they can understand a left-wing viewpoint that hasn't been distributed through mainstream media. as with all things, there's a vast middle ground. So I'm using the poles because they're the most easily defined. But if you're in between, it makes perfect sense if you relate to both sides in some way. So back to the American recipe on ignoring racism. The first subject is the distinction between liberal and conservative groups in how we perceive nationalism. So for me, I grew up being taught that America is an idea. Our Constitution is a living document. It's meant to be updated and changed with the evolution of our society so that the Constitution itself remains relevant. I learned early on that America is not the shining and wondrous example of morality and equity that our grade school textbooks would have us believe. And one of the proudest things, one of the things we can be proudest of in this country, is that the nation is built on a constitution that allows us, the people, to adapt and change. It allows us to recognize when and where we have misstepped and how to fix it. That's the genius of our constitution. But many conservatives subscribe to a more traditional sense of nationalism, in which they see America as infallible. To question America's integrity or that of the Constitution, or to imply that America has ever been on the wrong side of history is considered an act of heresy. In this version of nationalism, America becomes a religious belief rather than a grand experiment. And that's the type of nationalism that's at the heart of the idea of ugly topics like slavery or overt acts of racism or now systemic racism, advocating that those should be left out of the public school curriculums. If we dare to explore what's driving that kind of nationalism, we find a strange mix of willful ignorance, naivete, and a healthy dose of denialism. To deny the existence of racism, a person would either need to flat out ignore or genuinely be unaware of the very clear list of events that I mentioned in the previous section that showcase again and again that America has never been subtle about institutional racism. And just to go over some of what those events are, America practiced slavery for hundreds of years. We only counted black slaves as 3/5 a person in the original Constitution. Half of our citizenry literally went to war, put their lives on the line to keep black people enslaved. We passed Jim Crow laws. We endorsed and practiced complete segregation. We gave the latest and greatest school resources to the white schools and gave the worn, dated books to black schools. We passed criminal justice and drug policies that targeted black people in communities and established a prison industrial complex. We routinely turned the other way when black people were killed by police in many different manners, and we just had a president who could not bring himself to genuinely or authentically denounce racism during multiple live broadcasts. So just a little bit of things we did that might hint that we have some institutional racism. So to deny the existence of systemic racism, you must be completely unaware of all that. But anyway, once we understand how a person can become capable of employing the type of mental acrobatics that allow them to ignore racism or deny historical events, it becomes easier to imagine how some Americans think the Civil War was not about slavery, or don't believe the Confederate flag is a symbol of racism, or support policies that benefit the ultra wealthy even though it doesn't help them, or pretend the Constitution is gospel rather than an ever-changing document, or watch Fox News daily, or believe with all sincerity that a mass election fraud is the only way Joe Biden could have won an election, or maybe that's the only way they could take up arms against the United States and attack the Capitol in an act of terror while somehow thinking they're patriots. Maybe this is how we can understand how people get into that mindset. The process that cultivates the framework necessary to be able to overlook established historical facts and long-standing instances of human suffering is not a short process. I'm going to put forward what I think this process looks like. I am not a psychologist, zero, no background here. Okay. This is not based on psychological research. All I want to do here is I'm going to take my own experiences and observations and apply my own logic to that to draw some conclusions. So that disclaimer there, this is not psychology. This is my opinion. This is what I've observed. That being said, here's how I think that process works. Step one. A person is either never taught about certain events or social issues, or they're taught to downplay or ignore certain historical facts. Step one. Step two. Then without that very basic foundation of past lessons learned, those people are susceptible to toxic cultural concepts like extreme nationalism because those concepts have been ingrained in them already through family, community, the internet. And this step is crucial because it typically includes external figures in someone's lives making a conscious and intentional effort to persuade someone to ignore the facts or to twist the facts and and throw out misinterpretations, or as Kellyanne Conway said, to put out alternative facts. Right. So step two. Step three. Two major weapons employed in this persuasion are the concepts of victim blaming and self-aggrandizement. So what is victim blaming? Victim blaming is a powerful tool in dehumanizing the suffering of others while simultaneously creating a false narrative that the majority of suffering, especially when talking about whole demographics, is somehow the fault of or perpetuated by a lack of willingness or effort on the part of the victim to escape their plight. It removes all responsibility from the observer outside the oppressed group, even if actions that they take or the systems they participate in contribute to the suffering of those demographics. Hey, you're in that situation because you put yourself in that situation and you aren't trying hard enough to get out of it, or else you wouldn't be in that situation, right? Victim blaming. We pair that with self-aggrandizement. And self-aggrandizement, in my observation, comes primarily in the form of fetishizing hardship and suffering. So it typically sounds something like this. Hey, I had to sell all my things, live in the streets, work 19 jobs to get where I am today. So there's no excuse for other people who can't succeed. We've all heard something like that. I'd, walk uphill both ways in the snow, whatever. The person that's delivering this line is upset or bitter about the fact that their path was difficult. Rather than acknowledge that the effort required of them was excessive or unfair, or at a minimum unfortunate, they instead normalize that experience in a misery loves company kind of way. If I had to suffer, why should anyone else have it easier? And this is the same mindset that breed terms like, someone says, oh, well, life is unfair, or, oh, no one said life is easy. It boils down to an unwillingness to address the source issues that caused their own hardship in the first place in an effort to make things easier for others. But it goes further than that. Given the option of analyzing their experience and taking action to make sure others can avoid a similar one, they instead glorify their experience. And beyond that, they proclaim that experiences of suffering are necessary for others to succeed, which is bullshit. They believe this so strongly that they would rather keep systems of oppression or barriers against success in place for others. Need to stop. Messed up. All right. All right. Picking back up. They believe this so strongly that they would rather keep systems of oppression or barriers to success in place for others because the only way they can rationalize their own experience is by convincing themselves that it was good for them. They view suffering as a rite of passage, and that's where that's where the fetishism is. So, it gets elevated, it gets put up on a pedestal. What this narrow-mindedness ignores entirely is that there's enough adversity in everyone's life that occurs naturally, that those experiences are more than enough to do things like build character. We all go through the deaths of family. We all face adversity at our jobs or losing jobs or, difficulty with friends or mental illness, whatever. There's enough, right? But by leaving roadblocks in place intentionally, they aim to guarantee a level of suffering for everyone. And this phenomenon is not exclusive to any one demographic. It's utilized in other cultural arguments. You hear it all the time in relationship to different subjects, but it's particularly relevant to issues of systemic racism because it paints the illusion that because hardship is universal, that targeted or systemic suffering just doesn't make sense. If white people suffer too, then why should a white person believe that a black person suffering is actually systemic oppression, right? And this is where so much of the confusion with white privilege comes in, because this thought process allows for white people to falsely equate their suffering with that of minority groups, and therefore it breeds an unwillingness to believe that minority groups face built-in barriers to success that white people don't, because acknowledging those barriers, they believe, would somehow minimize the value they place in their own suffering, right? It takes away from their own. So to recap, step 3 is victim blaming and self-aggrandizement. Step 4, once basic facts and truths are denied and an extreme feeling of nationalism takes root within a person, that person's going to become defensive about any challenge to the workings or reputations of their country. They're going to become resentful of people who offer even mild suggestions or alternatives to the status quo of their belief system. And because their love of country borders on religious fanaticism, they're going to begin to hate anyone who begins to bring about change that flies in the face of their perfect America, or perfect whatever country, really, because this applies anywhere that this mindset can happen. Step 5. Now, if they're angry and feeling defensive and scared, they turn on right-wing media. And the like-minded personalities that they find there, paired with the familiar disregard of truth and fact and extreme hyperbole, are going to feed their conviction. Step 6. Then the people feeling this way do things like complain about Dr. Seuss books being removed from the market, or demand CRT not be taught in schools, even though it hasn't been taught in schools, or buy into long-planned, extremely obvious narratives of a fraudulent election campaign, being described months before the election ever occurred, while simultaneously also believing that if their candidate wins the election, then there must not have been fraud. Right? Simultaneously, their anger, their fear, their warped sense of reality is going to leave them vulnerable to brainwashing and the types of calls to action we witnessed leading up to the insurrection of January 6th. And suddenly people who profess an unyielding love of country and consider themselves the epitome of an American patriot are laying siege to the U.S. Capitol, literally taking up arms against the very country they say they love. It's a long process. It starts when we're young. It's complex. It's not easy. It's not something that happens overnight. It's not something that happens without a lot of effort, conscious effort on the parts of multiple players, whether it be family members or, a party, a political party, or, media that's trying to get their message across. What these people don't often say out loud is that they only love the version of America that allows them to comfortably ignore wide-scale issues of race and frequently their own privilege. Once the blissful ignorance is challenged, they have no issue attacking their country despite the lack of any fundamental transgression on the part of either the government or the citizens. Based on conversations I've had or I've seen on social media, I've seen people say that they will take up arms against other Americans or the government if something is done that they don't like a constitutional repeal or reform of the Second Amendment, for instance. But they would take up arms simply because they don't believe that those changes represent the America they believe in. They are willing to undermine the Constitution and the framework of America in order to preserve their own definitions of them, even if the majority of the country wants to move forward and continue progressing. In short, the same recipe that allows a person to ignore racism lends itself to the kind of extremism and fanaticism, especially in the age of Trump, and it should not be taken lightly, okay? So I'm a liberal. I know there's a lot of moderates out there. What is very seldom acknowledged is how the radical right became radical. That there is an assembly line in place for this to happen. There is a reason that when Trump came into office, so many people changed. Their opinions changed, their demeanor changed. They were saying things that you've never seen them say before. That wasn't accidental. There are mechanisms in place that are making these people second guess their beliefs, making them feel scared, making them feel anxious, and then saying, oh, well, we need to take stronger action. We need to take radical action because now I'm scared for my own well-being. And it's a slow kind of deliberate brainwashing. And we don't talk about it enough. We talk about far too much, oh, well, that's crazy. But we don't talk about how the crazy got there and how it's staying there. After the attack of January 6th, a lot of Republicans in office, I believe, really thought that Donald Trump was going to lose sway with voters. They were calling for commissions. They were saying, oh, yeah, let's investigate January 6th. They were calling for investigations. They were calling for committees to be formed, generally unified, on that note at least. But over time, as it became clear that Trump wasn't losing as much power as they thought, they all backpedaled. There's this beholdenness to Trump and that type of far right ideology that sticks. And the reason it sticks is because of fear on multiple levels, from our politicians all the way down to the voters. And I say it shouldn't be taken lightly because it is a process. It is an assembly line. It's not by chance. It's not just people being crazy. Like, oh my God, what were they thinking? Oh, they'll change. They'll come to their senses. They won't if there's a system in place that is continually working to keep them exactly where they are. Okay? So that's the process. That's what I think, people go through to get to the mindset where they're, storming the Capitol. So there are challenges here. There are challenges in moving forward as a country. There's challenges in unifying. What does that look like? So just on the subject of systemic racism, critical race theory, I'm a generally open-minded person, or I try to be. I've had to change a lot of my viewpoints in my lifetime, because I was uninformed on them and I felt really strongly about them. And then over time I learned like, oh, you know what? Like, I'm not thinking the right way about this. Like, maybe I should rethink how I'm thinking about this, on a number of subjects. And this is no different. So despite me being relatively open-minded and I'm curious and I'm willing to put an effort to learn and understand, ideas, like white privilege or systemic racism or critical race theory, those were hard and uncomfortable lessons for me to learn. These were not like, oh, now I understand. There was a process that I went through, and it made me defensive. It made me feel a little bit guilty. And you have to work through that. I think that might be the natural reaction for a lot of people, even though it's not the right thing to feel because that's not productive. But you have to work through that. It's uncomfortable. So imagine if we have a straight white male in their 30s or 40s who has extremely limited knowledge about racism, and they do not or will not believe in concepts of systemic racism, and they don't believe that America is a racist nation. They believe that we're post-racism because we had a black president. They hear terms white privilege and they get defensive because they feel like they're being blamed for their whiteness. And then pair that with a strong sense of identity politics. That person's probably likely loyal to the Republican Party or to the conservative ideology, at least. At a minimum, if they ever wanted to learn these concepts, it'd be a betrayal of their political community. Just to touch on that, currently, I think we see this more with Republicans than Democrats. And I don't think I'm being biased here. I might be, and if I am, please let me know. Democrats regularly challenge their own leadership, regularly, from both the progressive side and the moderate side. You've got AOC and Bernie Sanders pushing for big programs that will bring fundamental change to America, at least I believe, in a good way. And then you've got the Joe Manchins of the world who are saying, ignore them. We need to be working with the Republicans in a bipartisan way. So you've got it from both sides. And there's a wide spectrum. And yet, AOC is not being removed from her committees. Joe Manchin's not being removed from his committees. They're all part of the same party. No one's being punished for, taking the opposite view of the party. Republicans have said to their members, if you don't fall in line, you're going to be ostracized and you're going to be removed from positions of power. You're going to be removed from committees. And they say this no matter how radical an issue is being pushed. No, and if it basically if it's coming from Trump or it's coming from McCarthy, that's what it is. And if you step out of line, it's over, right? There's a zero tolerance policy. It's an authoritarian way to run your party. That really can't be denied. We're talking about a party whose majority of House reps voted against certifying an election, and in both chambers who voted down any investigation into the attack on our Capitol. You know, if a person who's open-minded and willing to put in the effort to learn about these concepts and theories can struggle with them and be made uncomfortable by them, then the likelihood that someone who's typically unwilling to explore such concepts, the likelihood that they'll come to understand those concepts, never mind advocate for them or for social change, is pretty close to zero. And that gap in unwillingness to challenge the status quo, and the will of people, top to bottom, politicians to voters, to self-reflect, that's at the heart of most of the political division in this country. But it's especially relevant to racism. To many conservatives, racism is a zero-sum issue, as in they believe that if you empower Black Americans and remove the social barriers that have oppressed them, that will automatically disadvantage white Americans. Oh, well, blacks are empowered, then whites must be putting in a position of a disadvantageous position. There we go. And that's not the case. And they get here because they're not really concerned, conservatives, about equal competition, because in their minds, they've earned everything that they have earned already as if the playing field were equal. But they still unknowingly project their belief that if Black Americans have the same economic support, education, access to voting, and representation, and were not disproportionately targeted by the justice system, that it might be more difficult for a white person to succeed. They channel that, right? Plainly put, many white people understand that Black Americans are disadvantaged simply because they are threatened by an America where Black Americans have the same opportunities from childhood as white kids. And they justify their fear by vehemently arguing that the playing field is already even. Therefore, any other support or reform or rights that would help Black Americans are viewed as unfair advantages in their eyes. If we empower Black people, we'll be giving them an advantage because they see the playing field as even now. So if we're doing anything to help the Black community, we must be giving them an advantage. And it's a gross viewpoint. It's hypocritical and it's self-serving, but it's complex. Because for some white people, these issues touch on their sense of identity, their sense of success or self-worth, and these concepts challenge the beliefs that exist at or are close to their core. I'm not offering this as an excuse. I'm just saying like, oh, well, their feelings get hurt, so, it is what it is. I'm not offering it as an excuse, but rather as a demonstration of why it's so difficult to change hearts and minds. Any issue that threatens a person's core set of beliefs is going to elicit a similar defensive response in anyone on any issue that they feel strongly about. If you tell me that you're going to take hockey away because you don't like it, I'm going to be really upset about you taking hockey away. And if you can find a really good reason, maybe I'll consider it, but I'm going to have to put a lot of effort into considering it because I don't want you to take hockey away. Right? We're up against human nature. Or at a minimum, we're up against the human ego. And so nothing short of cultural or generational evolution, fueled by comprehensive, honest, and sometimes uncomfortable education, is going to help to further bridge this gap. It's extremely difficult to unlearn what you've already learned, what you already believe in, which is why students should be exposed to concepts of systemic racism from the beginning. Once they're exposed, they can do whatever they want with that information. But to withhold that information from them entirely, it does students and America as a whole a disservice. And dangerously and heartbreakingly, Americans who feel this way, Americans who feel like, looking at systemic racism and maybe putting some stock in systemic racism and working to rid this country of systemic racism, Americans who feel this way exist in large enough numbers to stall efforts to remove these oppressive systems from our institutions in the name of equality and justice for Black Americans and other minority groups. And that means that every day, in every state, in every city and town, there are Americans, our fellow countrymen and women, who will continue to suffer at the hands of white advantage-based society because there are people out there in large enough numbers who deny that systemic racism exists. And because of their denial, people in our country, our neighbors, other Americans, we're all on the same team, are being hurt because of that. And we have other Americans saying, I don't believe they're hurt. Or if they're hurt, it's their own fault. Or, hey, I struggled too, so there's no excuse for them. Right? What we're seeing with critical race theory, systemic racism, in our current political climate is not really about the premise of the theory itself. It's about the validity of the civil rights movement that's going on right now. Conservatives have been immensely critical of many of the new schools of thought that have entered into the mainstream, such as white privilege, systemic racism, but until now, they've only been able to address them as separate abstract concepts. What do I mean by this? So white privilege. Oh, well, that's a term. White privilege gets thrown out there. Up until now, white privilege has been thrown out there as its own term, white privilege. We have discussions on white privilege, about white privilege, and what privilege means. And in some ways, the argument for the existence of white privilege is so strong that Republicans have had trouble making it sound as evil as they want it to sound. There's where we can pass a bill for healthcare. We're talking about a cultural theory in white privilege, right? Or systemic racism. They were tackling them as singular issues in singular arguments. And they could both engage them, but in a way that wasn't completely serious, or they could completely ignore it and no one on their side would care. But now they're hijacking the phrase critical race theory. They're bringing CRT into the conservative lexicon. Christopher Rufo, the gentleman who appeared on Tucker Carlson and brought critical race theory into the mainstream discourse in this way, has provided critics a brand, as he called it, under which to lump all the academic theories and principles that they disagree with. The term critical race theory sounds edgy and aggressive and even a little bit preachy. It's become a catch-all, not just for critical race theory, the theory itself, but for white privilege and systemic racism and social and civil rights movements. And it's a banner under which to condemn groups like Black Lives Matter. Oh, that Black Lives Matter, that's all critical race theory. That's that crazy critical race theory, and that's what they're pushing. That's what Black Lives Matter are pushing. And, it's as crazy as critical race theory, right? Because the definition of critical race theory that's being thrown out there right now is not critical race theory. It's this weird, twisted, bastardized version of critical race theory that Christopher Rufo himself has said is a brand for all things essentially civil rights related. It's a package, right? That wraps up all the uncomfortable academic race theories and annoying racial truths and pesky civil rights movements so that they can be conflated and confused and ultimately misrepresented. And the sudden widespread use of this term by conservatives has much more to do with a marketing strategy than it has to do with any intellectual argument, right? No conservative is actually trying to argue about the theory of critical race theory in its form as a law school, academic class or subject. They're talking about systemic racism and white privilege, and they're talking about it in the way that it's been conveyed to them by conservative media, and they're arguing against that, or they're using that as their basis as their argument against a actual theory, but it's not the actual theory because they're arguing against a theory that they created. They're taking both sides. Hey, critical race theory, that sounds cool. It doesn't mean what it means now. it means what we want it to mean, which is it's bad. Critical race theory is bad and it's crazy and it's stupid and it's extremist. And that's what it is, right? And then, liberals come along and go, oh, well, critical race theory, it's kind of like systemic racism. And they're like, yeah, systemic racism is bad. We've been saying that for like months now, right? So critical race theory is bad. And systemic racism is bad and white privilege is bad. It's all bad. Both sides of the argument. They've taken it. It makes me mad because I have time. I have time in this episode, which is nice. I don't usually have time to go on a little bit here, but I'm going to do it. So it makes me mad because the Republicans can market to their voters with a level of effect that is staggering. It's staggering. I don't know why Democrats can't better get their message out to the public. When you poll the public at large on issues without like putting like a candidate or without putting a candidate next to the issue or putting a party next to the issue, voters in America overwhelmingly favor Democratic policies, overwhelmingly, in like a blind study or whatever. They like healthcare. They want better social programs. They like more support. They're willing, they're willing to tax the rich, tax breaks for the middle class, all that stuff. They're all for it. Put the word Democrat next to it though. And Tucker Carlson says Democrats are bad. So if Democrats are bad and Democrats want healthcare, then I think healthcare is bad. Healthcare is bad, right? Same thing with critical race theory. Same thing with government support programs. I don't understand how the Republicans convince their voters that they shouldn't want free money from the government. Think about that. The party that is typically most skeptical of government and government, blah, 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 is like, hey, you give away all your welfare money and like blah, blah, blah. And COVID comes around, like people need support, businesses need support, people need support. They need to like pay their mortgages and go get groceries. And the Republicans convince some of their voters that, oh no, you shouldn't take that money. You don't want that money. And they repeat it. They repeat it on social media. They repeat it in conversations. They repeat it everywhere. It's like, you're turning down free money. The government's like, hey guys, like for once, we're going to help you out, right? Like we acknowledge the little guy. Hey, little guy, you guys are suffering. Your business isn't getting any customers. You can't pay your mortgage. Here's some money. And then they're like, no, we don't think we want that money. It doesn't, we don't want it. They said, don't take it. We're not going to take it. The Republicans are masterful at making their voter base believe whatever they're throwing out there. Even if it's like, hey, you don't want money. Okay, they don't want money. Democrats are typically great at marketing, great at branding, great at, getting up there and like giving some, impassioned speeches that really, make you feel good. They empower you. They make you feel good about like the things you believe in. They get an emotional reaction out of you. You're like, yeah, let's go. Right. And then they're like, oh yeah, the Republicans are doing this thing and it's not great, but we're going to try to work with them. Okay. What about healthcare though? Oh, well, we tried. There's no fight. And to some extent, I think this comes off because, or it exists in this way, because Democrats tend to hold themselves accountable a little bit more. And again, I don't think I'm being biased here. When Al Franken was accused of sexually harassing or sexually assaulting that woman, before any real story, real facts came out, he was asked to leave the Senate by the Democrats. And he did. There's a level of accountability that Democrats hold themselves to that isn't true for the Republican Party. Josh Hawley can wave at and support a group of people who attack the Capitol, and the Republican Party's like, yeah, but he's all right. He's cool. Oh, Ted Cruz, he's cool. It doesn't matter. The president might have had some part to play in that. Whatever. He's on our team and we like him. So yeah, we're just going to sweep that one under the rug, right? It's nuts. It's nuts. And in the same way, Democrats, I think, know that it's right to be bipartisan. It's right to want to try to find compromise. It's right to want to get something for everybody. And so we naively think that that's what we should try to do. And then Joe Manchin throws out plans with compromise in them, and Republicans laugh at him, and they're like, no, we're not passing that. Oh, it has everything we want in it. All right. Well, you wrote it though, so we're not going to pass it. It's infuriating because Republicans say they want all these things, but then they don't practice what they preach. I don't know what needs to happen here. I don't have a solution. All I'm saying is that Republicans can convince Americans not to take free money. Republicans can hijack a phrase like critical race theory that came out of some legal academic book. No one had really ever heard of it before besides people in the law field. They take critical race theory. That sounds cool. It means that all things for civil rights are bad. White privilege. Oh, that's stupid. Systemic racism. It doesn't exist. Racism. We're done with that in America. That's all critical race theory. Critical race theory is stupid. Wow. They got a guy who has like no experience. He said he researched this for 6 months and talked to a few people, and he came up with this definition of critical race theory. And look, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. Some nobody was like, hey, this, and half the country was like, yeah, that. I don't know. I don't have a solution for it. But it is in and of itself dangerous. It's a scary kind of dichotomy because one side is really good at doing this and the other side is still trying to play ball or not taking as strong a stand as they need to, or are worried about coming off as divisive. And I'm not sure what we do there. So, but that's how critical theory, that's why critical theory is in the mainstream right now. It is a branding campaign. It is a marketing campaign by the Republican Party. It has nothing to do with the definition. It has nothing to do with the legal concept of, hey, this is a way in which we analyze our laws to see whether or not they advantage or disadvantage some people over others. It's nothing close to that definition. Like I said, marketing strategy. The issue of whether CRT should be allowed to be taught in schools isn't even relevant. The only goal here was to find an easily digestible, easily recognizable term that, when mentioned, evokes all the anger and all the frustration, all the fear that conservative voters associate with all of these terms simultaneously. Critical race theory will become the backbone of the conservative right's resistance to the current civil rights movement. Critical race theory is going to be their answer to the civil rights movement. When you hear about, hey, systemic racism in the criminal justice system, or systemic racism in the education, or systemic racism in the housing market, they're gonna be like, that's just that critical race theory thing, and their voters are just gonna say that's that critical race theory thing, and that's it. And so far, this is working better, I think, than Christopher Rufo could have imagined. And in all honesty, if we want to move forward as a country, we need to come to terms with these concepts. We're not going to move forward on racism if we don't all, or the majority of Americans, don't acknowledge systemic racism, or try to understand systemic racism, or to understand white privilege. It's not going to happen. We're going to stay stuck. If we stay stuck and people don't change their opinions or work toward improving themselves, or work toward challenging themselves to maybe think about what they're saying, what they're believing, if that doesn't happen, we're just going to become more and more entrenched, not only on the issue of racism, but on all of the major issues that are trigger points for us. And, a lot of people say, oh, well, we need to unify. We're so divided. We're divided over these issues because these are issues of morality. These are issues of how we treat other people. Systemic racism it's not just a theory. It's the framework in which many Americans are living their lives. it's a set of disadvantages that Americans are having to fight through because of the color of their skin or, their place of upbringing, whatever it may be. And so we can talk about this and theorize about it and argue whether or not it exists all day. The longer we do that, the more people are going to suffer. The more people suffer, the more angry they're going to get. And if the right stays entrenched saying that, oh, there's no systemic racism, we don't need to do anything to solve this problem, we don't need to pay attention to voter laws, we don't need to do any of it, it will escalate. And I think everybody at some point has thought about that. I think coming up to the 2020 election, I think a lot of people, some people said that they feared backlash, violence, should the election go one way or the other, or should something happen. And I think a lot of us have thought like, hey, there are elements in play here where it seems like this situation is a little bit of a tinderbox on the whole, and that it has the potential to explode under the right circumstances. And that's how most wars start, right? There's a tense situation, an event happens, and there we go. And we're off. And I don't think anyone wants that. But in order to overcome our divide on these issues, we need to come to some common ground from an intellectual standpoint as well as a human standpoint. Right now, in my opinion, conservatives are not acknowledging the actual literal suffering of millions of Americans. They just refuse to acknowledge it. And they also won't challenge themselves to look beyond their own personal beliefs to see if, hey, is there anything to the systemic racism thing? Is there anything to this white privilege thing? If I look at these subjects and I remove myself, I remove my feelings from it, and I read the text on the page, and I try not to react. I try not to feel guilty or angry or anything like that. When I read the words, is there truth to them? Is there anything there? They don't go that far. They take the talking points that they hear on Fox News or even further right media that's out there, OAN and, people on YouTube, and they internalize that, and then they don't move because, like I said before, to think about changing your opinion on those topics, to entertain it, is a betrayal or would be a betrayal of their cultural identity. And I do think that Republicans are more likely to feel strongly about their affiliation to that identity than Democrats do, because Republicans impose far harsher penalties on those that step away from that mainstream point of view. So what we need to do is we just need to find that common ground. And, again, I might be biased a little bit here. Because the Democrats aren't perfect, liberals aren't perfect, progressives aren't perfect. There are definite issues with ideology there too. There is a far left. From my perspective, if the center, if you're looking center, I think if you move 10 inches to the left, that's how far left our most left people in government are. Our politicians, our actual politicians. Let's say 10 inches to the left. But if we go to the right, we're like 40 inches right. We're talking about people on the right who have literally advocated for authoritarian government. I can't say this word today. Authoritarian government. They've advocated for our election to be overthrown or undermined, or for the vote to be overturned in a very real way. And that's not something that the left has done. When Democrats lost in 2016, we were upset. We whined. We didn't like Trump. We said we didn't like Trump. We said, hey, that Russia thing, we should check that out. That should be investigated. But no one said, oh, Hillary's the president. Hillary's the president, and she's gonna retake office in 10 months because she somehow won the election. It didn't happen. There is a large gap in the level of crazy that the extremes get. Okay, so if the left is 10 inches left and the right is 40 inches right, at its most extreme, and I'm not talking about people on the internet. I'm talking about the people serving as our public servants in Congress. If AOC and Bernie are the crazy left, and you put them up against Marjorie Taylor Greene, I think you'll understand where I'm coming from. Right? So And the other thing that I wanted to touch on a little bit, just to get into this process, right? What does this process do? This process of getting people, especially on the right, to a point where they can deny historical facts and get to a certain point where they're thinking like, systemic racism isn't real, white privilege isn't real, so on and so forth. Like I said, when Hillary lost in 2016, how many people drove around and saw huge Hillary flags up on the side of the road 10 months after the fact? How many people drove down the road and saw a Hillary store with Hillary memorabilia that you could buy? How many people saw Hillary Clinton on TV giving massive rallies to huge crowds saying that she was going to run for office again within a few months of the election? How many people saw that? How many people saw huge Hillary banners in people's windows or, who? It didn't happen. It's a difference. It's a level of insanity that we're seeing with people who voted for Trump, especially, and Trump supporters, that we've just never seen before in the history of this country. And it cannot be equated to anything that the left has done. It just hasn't happened. It hasn't happened. No one can pretend it happened. If you can pretend it happened, then you've fallen victim to the process that I've described in this episode. A little bit of reality goes a long way. So, getting a little bit off topic here, but back to critical race theory. This is the second episode on critical race theory. I defined it in the first episode. I talked about what the Republicans think of it. We heard Mike Pence, Ted Cruz earlier this episode. It's as critical race theory is as racist as the Klansmen and white hoods, right? Like I said, that's 40 inches of extremism on the right, right? If we're gonna qualify it, that statement is 40 inches of extremism when compared to the actual definition that I read off at the beginning of this episode and the last. So you've got critical race theory. It comes in with Christopher Rufo on Fox News. Republicans get incensed about it, and then they demand that it not be taught in schools, even though it's not being taught in any public schools, K through 12, anywhere in this country. Like I said last time, the Republicans have managed to mobilize against a problem that doesn't exist in a way that if they applied to real problems, we'd be in great shape. If they focused on constructive issues and actually getting stuff done. But what does that say? It says that there is a perception in this country, there is a feeling in this country that says that even the thought of an idea like systemic racism or some of our bad history, our dark history as America, being taught in schools is dangerous. Those are dangerous things to teach. We don't want them taught here. And what's the motive for that, right? Because if people can truly do whatever they want with the information, what's the harm in giving it to them because it's fact? Nothing. They're trying to shield people from these facts. And they're doing it because they don't like what the inevitable outcome of a civil rights movement is going to be, which is easier voting for minority groups, easier voting for all Americans, and therefore easier voting for minority groups as well. Better opportunity for Black communities and minority communities from the time that they're born that are the same as, that I get to experience. The obstacle. So many people in the Black community, minority community have had to face obstacles and barriers that have never once come close to threatening my experience as a white male, right? And these ideas are scary to a lot of conservatives because they believe it's a zero-sum game. In some ways, there is a self kind of delusion that is keeping them where they're at because in reality, equality doesn't hurt anybody. Equality will not disadvantage white people. It is not a zero-sum game. If we empower Black people and minority communities, we are all better for it. We have like high-paying, high-tech jobs with unfilled seats that Americans can't fill because we're not educated enough to fill them. Let's educate everybody. Let's get those seats filled. Let's get Americans in those jobs, keep the money in this economy. If we help everyone come up to the same floor to start at, we will be better off as a nation. Period. The better the middle class and lower class are doing, the better the country is doing. We have literally a case study with the New Deal after the Depression and after World War II to prove all of that. We have the evidence. It's been done. When the let's throw out the bad word. When the socialist programs were put into place after World War II, the economy boomed, and we have all of those things today. And no one wants to let them go. They're critical to the American experience, right? When Americans are polled on the issues, they overwhelmingly favor Democratic policies, as in parties pushed by the Democratic Party. It is the affiliation with identity, which both groups are definitely guilty of, but is the association with a group that prevents people from voting in their own self-interest most of the time, right? And because those groups are powerful, and in this case, the conservative right with critical race theory, because they're powerful, because they're persuasive, because there are mechanisms in place from birth up through the time you become a voter to make sure that you vote a certain way in many places, the divide is there to stay. If you take anything out of these 2 episodes, anything at all, if you can disagree with me up and down on everything I've just said, if you take away anything at all, it is when you hear a new term for the first time, don't listen to the guy on the television screen. Don't. Go look it up. Go to a dictionary and look up the term. I've never heard that before. They're saying this is bad. What is it? Go look it up. Oh, it's that. That doesn't sound so bad. Okay, why doesn't it sound so bad? Do a little bit of your own research if you're invested, if you hear something. I think it's weird that people can get really, really passionate about a subject like critical race theory when they actually know nothing about critical race theory. They are willing to take the media and people like Christopher Rufo and then Ted Cruz and Mike, they're willing to take them at their word. And clearly they haven't done any research into what it is because they wouldn't feel the way they do if they did. But they're completely okay with the term critical race theory being hijacked and used in that way, which either means that they don't care that that's happening or they haven't done the research. It's one or the other. It's as simple as that. So that is my second episode on critical race theory part 2. These have been heavier episodes. In the upcoming weeks, I'd like to get a little bit lighter and, bring some humor back into it and address some subjects that aren't so heavy. But with the way this is in our media right now, and the fact that these are issues that have really, really negative effects on a lot of Americans, I think it's important to, give it the platform and, serious discussion that I think it deserves. So thank you for listening to the first episode and this one. If you read the articles, thank you for reading those 2 articles. I really appreciate that. You can check them out over at thenewdeal.com or at medium.com. This video will be up. I'm going to leave it up. In the future, if I live stream, I'll probably take it down or keep it as exclusive content, but I'm going to leave this one up. So the podcast is technically out there and available on the live platforms. Polished episode should be coming out sometime tomorrow, fully edited and without all of my pauses and stutters. So thank you again for listening. Thanks for listening to New Deal. Go to thenewdeal.com. Listen to the podcast on Spotify, Google Podcast, Podbean, Apple Podcasts, whatever it may be. Please like, subscribe, and please rate and review the podcast. Let me know how I'm doing. 5 stars would be appreciated. Doesn't need to be, hey, I disagree with you on this subject, and be like, hey, your podcast is generally informative, and even though I disagree with you, it's all right. Would definitely appreciate it. So thanks for that, guys. Thanks for listening to New Deal. Hope everyone had a happy 4th of July, and I will talk to you guys next Wednesday. All right, that's it. That's how I record. That is the live stream. Thanks for tuning in and listening. Don't see too many comments. Do Democrats do it though? If it benefits them, they acknowledge it too. Yes, I think that is the difference. I think if something benefits the Democrats, they're also willing to acknowledge that it benefits them. Whereas I think the GOP plays more of a shadow game. Hey, do this, but you don't know why. I don't think I think it's equally as obvious, but also more innocuous. So I think you're right there. And I'm always going to be a little bit biased because I do truly believe that if the left extreme is 10 inches out, then the right extreme is 40. I don't think you have the same type of crackpots on the left that you do on the right. There are Republicans where I can listen to Mitt Romney. I can listen to Mitch McConnell at times and be like, okay, I don't like this person. I don't like the way they vote. I don't think they represent me, but the way they describe that policy, okay, I get it. There are people on the Republican side who don't ever give you that. You never get that. You never get a solid argument. You don't even get a reference to the issue. They're just like, oh yeah, it's bad. And that's it. There's no conversation. There's no extra information. There's no depth to it. It's all based on emotion. It's all based on getting people riled up. And I really just don't think you see it on the left like you see it on the right. And let me know if I'm wrong. But that's my experience. You might think AOC pushing the Green New Deal, you might think that's extreme. But when AOC goes on TV, she's going to tell you, I want the new Green Deal because A through Z, it will do this, this, and this. We're going to put this, this, and this in our plan because we believe that it will, lead to this by this year. If Marjorie Taylor Greene's like, what do you think about the Green New Deal? It's going to be like, oh, she's evil and that's communist. It's going to be so hyperbolic that she never really addresses the issue. She never, and I do think there's a difference there. So, and I plan to do an episode on that at some point. I've got my whiteboard over here with the ideas and stuff on it. So I'm hoping that at some point I can, I want to address the differences between how the left and right operates, because I think far too often a lot of people in the middle are like, oh, they're both evil, and maybe they are, but like definitely different levels, to different extents, and with different levels of truth. So I might want to get into that. But next week I want to keep it a little bit lighter. So what do we got? Looking at like maybe doing some technology stuff, like work from home or something like that. Big picture things. Maybe I'll talk about aliens or something. So we'll see. But anyway, it is a little getting close to 5:30 here. So I want to get some editing done. So thank you so much for listening to the live version. First podcast I've recorded live. Definitely appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed the content. The complete episode will be out sometime tomorrow afternoon. So please go check that out on your podcast platform of choice. Please like, subscribe, whatever it is, whichever platform you're on. Hit the little alert button if you're on YouTube. And I appreciate you guys listening. Have a great afternoon. Hope you guys had a great 4th of July, and I'll talk to you soon.